Howdy. For Friday's lesson, I'd like to take a look at Desert Storm. Uh, we looked at the 80s, we looked at 80s culture and everything like that, but I think we need also to take a look at Desert Storm, which is a very important event in American history. And hopefully you'll look in your textbook or your online textbook, chapter 19, which is lesson 4. We'll talk about this. But just talk to your parents, your relatives, see what they remembered about Desert Storm. And then also we're going to talk about Somalia, okay? So today we'll take a look at these. Ronald Reagan was the president of the 80s. Okay. His vice president, George H.W. Bush, is elected. If you look at the map there on the 88 thing, the red states went for Bush. Take a look at that. Wow, he carried a lot of America. He won really big. But really what he was doing was riding Ronald Reagan's coattails. Everybody liked Reagan. He had a blip, of course, with the Iran-Contra affair, but by and large, people liked Reagan. He was popular, and so his vice president, Bush, is going to be elected, and he's kind of popular too. A couple things about Bush. He had been a World War II vet. He'd been a pilot and had been shot down by the Japanese. He was from Texas, though his family actually is more from Maine. They had a summer home up in Kennebunkport, Maine, and so they'd stay there also. All right. He was a one-term president. He got elected, and the biggest thing that happened in his term of office was Desert Storm. So let's talk a little bit about Desert Storm. All right. Saddam Hussein, see the guy with picture there with the gun in his hand? Saddam Hussein was the dictator who ruled Iraq. And he ruled Iraq with a strong hand. He had secret police, and he played the two people in Iraq, the Sunni and the Shiite, which are both Muslim groups, but he played them against each other, and he stayed in power. He fought a war with Iran, and since we didn't like Iran after the Iran hostage thing, and we had that failed thing where those helicopters blew up in the desert and all that stuff, so basically we quietly helped Saddam Hussein fight Iran because the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Well, this war didn't go so well for Saddam because Iran is a big country, a lot of population, they were unified, and they fought Iraq. Well, when this war is over, 1989, Iraq is broke and it's weak. And in that part of the world, if you're weak, then other people start looking at you in a different way. So Saddam Hussein decides, hey, I need money, I want to look strong. So if you look at the map there, right next to Saddam, Iraq is the salmon-colored one. Right below that is the country of Kuwait. Kuwait has a crudload of oil, but not a huge population. Kuwait was a perfect target for Saddam. He picked a fight with Kuwait, saying that they were stealing oil from underneath Iraq, that they drilled into Iraq and were stealing oil from Iraq, and he invaded them. He took the country over. Saddam Hussein had a very big military. And he took Kuwait over basically pretty easily. But this is a problem. Because if you've got Saddam Hussein and Iraq and all the oil of Iraq, plus all the oil in Kuwait, that's a lot of oil for one person to control. And right next to that is Saudi Arabia, an ally of the United States. And Saudi Arabia has such a small population because it's mostly desert. So they look to America. Now, what if Saddam Hussein took the next step and would have taken Saudi Arabia? What would he have controlled? A third of the world's oil or something? That was just untenable. We just would not allow that to happen. Saddam did not think the United States would fight for Kuwait. He overreached, and in that, he made a mistake. Because when he thought America wouldn't fight, he hadn't counted on George Bush and the Americans saying, no. Now, the first thing that Bush does is he says Operation Desert Shield. And Desert Shield is we send American forces to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia then will be protected from Iraqi aggression. I don't think Saddam Hussein had serious plans about invading Saudi Arabia, but we weren't going to take that chance. So Desert Shield, was when we sent people to Saudi Arabia to basically protect them and stop them. Because Iraq, again, had a huge army. At that time, it was the world's 4th largest standing army. It was big. But the other thing that Bush does, other than sending troops there, is he starts looking at what can we do. And he builds a coalition. He looks at the countries around Iraq and says, hey, are you worried about this guy being aggressive? And he builds a coalition. Syria, well, they don't like Iraq, and so Syria basically kind of buys into it. Iran, my God, they don't like it. No, but Iran and us are not going to work together because we still have all that conflict between them, even up to today. But when you look at other countries in the area, Bush is able to put together a coalition of forces of countries that are willing to fight with us to defend Saddam, or to defeat Saddam, because we can't let him to have all that oil. And he puts two very smart men in charge of the operation. If you look at the picture here, the one on the left is General Colin Powell. General Colin Powell is a very impressive man, a very smart man. In charge of the military, you've got a guy with the mind. And Colin Powell is going to be a very successful general. He's able to communicate well, gets along with Bush, gets along with the allies, and he's going to be the overall commander. The person that's actually in the field command, if you look on the right, is a guy named General Norman Schwarzkopf. He'd been nicknamed Stormin' Norman. Everyone seems to think he has a temper and all, but he was a very aggressive commander. When he decided to make a decision, he was very decisive and a very good field commander. And these two guys make it a great team. If you want to think of something we've studied in history that would kind of help you understand it, how about World War II? Eisenhower, the overall commander, he was the one that worked with the British and the Allies and stuff. And in the field, he had like Patton and Bradley, good aggressive generals that could actually do the stuff. So Desert Storm, which is going to follow up, we are not going to be alone. Desert Shield was the stopping of them. Desert Storm is going to be the removal of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. On the classroom, there's going to be two links that I really want you to look at, and you'll see them afterwards. I'll mention this. All right. Operation Desert Storm, if you look back, 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. We build up our troops. We send, if you look at the tents over here, my son was over in Kuwait for the National Guard much later, but it's a desert. He talked about the heat, the sand, the scorpions, and everything like that. It's an inhospitable place. But we built up a huge force there. We sent over tanks. And our allies, people like the Brits and other people were there too, and they sent their forces over. We decided not to attack until we built all of our forces up. Okay? Desert Storm. Desert Storm is going to be an American-led, but a lot of coalition forces attack, and we're going to kick butt. This thing, when it starts, really does not last that long. 100 hours and 162 soldiers killed on our side, and some of those were actually by accident. If you look at the pictures here, up on the left, upper left, that's the road of death. All those vehicles, once we attack with our airplanes and stuff, the Iraqi army decides they need to get out of Kuwait, and they steal a bunch of vehicles. Our airplanes catch them out in the open, and you can see the damage and carnage of what we did. Okay. Now, here's a map, and this is ingenious. Obviously, we have to attack Kuwait to kick them out. So Saddam Hussein has most of his forces in Kuwait. But Schwarzkopf is not just going to run straight at the door and try to knock it down. He's also going to use strategery, as George Bush would have said it. Anyhow, what he does is he shows that we're going to attack Kuwait, which eventually we do, but his main forces are on the left. And if you look at the country of Kuwait, we attack. It's like a left hook. We come around. We attack in the desert. We send in airborne troops. If you notice, you'll see on the map the black shield with the white eagle and the two A's. Those are 101st and 82nd Airborne. So we'll drop them behind enemy lines. And then our mechanical units, our tanks and stuff, we're going to race around. We're going to attack Saddam where he's the weakest. And we're going to crush him on the left. And as his troops are in Kuwait fighting our other troops and the British that are fighting their way in, we're going to basically flank him and trap him in there. And the secret to this is a lot of mobility. Tanks, tanks, tanks. Armored personnel carriers, Bradleys. And we're going to race through the desert. We're going to control the air. Now, before this, it starts out with an air attack. We're going to basically attack all of the infrastructure of Iraq, like their airplanes, their radars, their missile defenses. And once we control the sky, our planes can hunt them down, and we do. So we shoot missiles at them. Now, Saddam Hussein, what he does is he shoots these missiles called Scud missiles back at our forces. So we have to develop something called the Patriot missile batteries to shoot those down. He also shoots Scud missiles at Israel. Israel shows a lot of restraint. He wanted to shoot the missiles at Israel, hoping that to pull Israel into the war, and then the Arab countries that were helping us, like Egypt and the other countries, would basically then have to pull out because of considerations of a Israeli Muslim type war. Israel showed a lot of restraint and did not get involved. So we and our allies are going to take them out. Once our planes come in and blast everything that moves from the skies, then we're going to send in our tanks. There's going to be a great video on Classroom. I got the link there. I want you to look at the first one. It talks about our first tank encounter, really, where a group of our tanks meets and beats a bunch of Iraqi tanks. The Americans used something called an M1 Abrams tank, which in the 90s was probably the best tank in the world. It's a heavily armored monster. And that thing can go full speed, can shoot through smoke, sandstorms. It's got technology that at the time was better than anything that Saddam had. Okay? The war was really quick. We blast through, and the much vaunted, Iraqi army collapses. Over the air power shooting everything up, the American tanks, which they really have a hard time going tank to tank with, we blast through Iraq really quick. But part of the coalition that we put together did not want us invading the country of Iraq. They just wanted the Iraqis thrown out of Kuwait. And so we did kick them out of Kuwait and recovered Kuwait. But because we didn't invade all of Iraq, just the southern part, it's going to be a problem. Now, I want to put this on here. If you look, Saddam, that madman, what he did is he set all these fires in the oil fields in Kuwait. They set all these fires, and he thought that the fires and the pollution and everything would slow us down, would cause damage, and it would take us years to put out. But American companies brought in, we used American technology and American know-how, and we eventually would put out all of the fires. But the damage, all the smoke and pollutants in the air and all that other stuff had a long-term effect both on the soldiers that were in Desert Storm and the people that are there and even stationed afterwards. My son was there, a decade after Desert Storm. But when he was in Kuwait, he said there was still wreckage you could see in the desert. There are connections to it. Look at this picture. From the sky, you could actually see the clouds and stuff from some of the oil fires from space. Now, the American forces, the coalition forces, had a good plan, a good leader, good equipment, and they beat Saddam Hussein. But they did not go all the way to Baghdad to kick him out. Bush thought that eventually, because Saddam Hussein's military collapsed, the people in Iraq would rise up against him and chase him out themselves. But you can't forget the fact that our coalition partners, they wanted Saddam Hussein weakened. They didn't want us taking over it. And really, nobody wanted to take over Iraq, because then you got to rebuild it. And we blew the crud out of that country. Saddam Hussein did not die. He did not get kicked out of power. When the people tried to rise up, Saddam was able to marshal his forces and crush them, especially in the south around Basra. The people that would have risen up against Saddam eventually were hunted down, and they didn't kick him out. Saddam Hussein will stay in power. He will consolidate his power, and he is going to hold on tight, and he's going to start looking at other things like chemical weapons, and we even are afraid that he would have nuclear weapons. He didn't, but we'll talk about that later. So we are going to have to go back in and invade Iraq a decade later because we didn't take him out the first time. But in the truth, in the end, I don't know if we really could have or should have in 1990. He was an evil man, a horrible dictator. He was a guy who'd done horrible atrocities to people. He dropped gases and bad stuff on the Kurds in the northern part of his country. He's a man with no moral, no anything. But in the end, he actually survived the war. Kind of think about it this way. Can you imagine World War II if we defeat the German armies, but we don't invade Germany and Hitler stayed in power? It's kind of like that. So the victory was a good one after Vietnam. We have a short war. We win. We're happy. But the problem is going to be there. You're going to have a guy, Saddam, that's going to stay in the Middle East, and that problem will fester. If you look at the picture here, Bush had a lot of popularity. So how does a president like that not get reelected? We'll talk about that next week when he runs against a guy named Bill Clinton. All right. Now, one more conflict in the 90s. I want to mention it. It is not connected with this. It's at the end of this. Bush is going to get run for election, and he will not win, so this is going to become Clinton's problem. But another problem happens in this era. In Africa, the country of Somalia, if you look at the picture here, Somalia is kind of like the rhinoceros horn that sticks out here, right by Ethiopia. The government of Somalia basically collapsed and it's replaced by a whole bunch of warlords, guys who control people with guns. And if you look at the picture here, the truck and the gun, one of them was a guy by the name of Muhammad Farah Adid. And Adid was a bad warlord. And there was a drought in this part of the world and they were suffering. So we sent aid in, but the warlords would take the aid. And they controlled the country, and it's just a whole bunch of unrest. And when there's anarchy and no government, you get a lot of problems. Like in Somalia, later on, those who watched the movie Captain Phillips about the Somali pirates, because without a government to control, all these people start taking their piracy out, and that starts affecting the world. So anyhow, a lot of countries decide to help Somalia. They want to send in aid workers, but all these warlords are a problem. So we get the idea. Let's go ahead and let's take out Adid. There's a great movie called Black Hawk Down. I'd say if you have time and you would like to watch a great movie showing American courage and in a bad plan, please watch it. The movie is astounding. I talked with the guy at Burke, who is our chief custodian there, who was in Somalia, and he would come in and talk to our stories about it. And it was just one of those wars. It was just crazy because we were fighting in Mogadishu. We're in this, it's an urban thing in the city where everybody has a gun and there's no government. It's really tough. But we decided to send in forces to go ahead and capture Adid. Well, he wasn't there at the hotel we thought he was, and our forces all of a sudden got surrounded. And in the process, we sent in helicopters to support him, and one of our Black Hawk helicopters is shot down. Now, if you look over here, you're going to see an award, which is really something special. That is the Medal of Honor. That is for bravery. After the Black Hawk was shot down, 2 American snipers volunteered to go in and try to secure the plane and defend the crew till help could come. It was a mission where both of them would be killed, both would lose their lives. They knew what they were going into, and they, without hesitation, volunteered. And both of them died. It's just, you know what? That is something that you sacrifice your life for those people. And if you see the movie Black Hawk Down, it'll help you see the courage, as portrayed by Hollywood, of what those guys went through. In the end, 18 American troops are killed, 84 are wounded in action. And it is a disaster because we went into a country and we fought a battle we were not prepared for. Our guys were in Humvees, and they were being shot at from every direction by RPGs and other guns. We were just outgunned. We didn't have the support. We didn't have the heavy armor that we needed. And it was a very valuable lesson to America. It basically said, if you're going to get involved in these small wars, have a plan, have the necessary equipment, and know your goals and know what you think. But it was kind of one of those things like Desert Storm left a good feeling in America, and Desert Storm was a win. Somalia was not. It was a black eye where we tried to get involved and it didn't. But it also shows that even though you're the most powerful country in the world, that doesn't mean you can control everything. So, in the end, what should you take away from this? Desert Storm and Somalia. Desert Storm, America stands up to aggression in the Middle East because, again, they've got oil, which is something we're really worried about. The unintended result of Desert Storm is that groundswell. When we welcomed the people back from Desert Storm in the victory parades, we kind of realized that we had not given that same welcome home to Vietnam vets. And a lot of American Vietnam vets at this time start getting the recognition, the respect that they deserved, and in a lot of the parades they would be included. It was like America saying, yeah, oh, you know what, we really didn't do you right. You served your country. And so that's one of we didn't intend that to result from Desert Storm, but that is a positive. On the other hand, Desert Storm, while it was a victory, it didn't solve the problem. Saddam Hussein is still going to be there, and he's still going to be a danger. And so we're going to talk about that after we talk about 9/11. Somalia, what it shows is you may be the biggest, greatest country in the world, the greatest military in the world, the greatest soldiers in the world, the greatest equipment in the world. But that doesn't mean that other people can't beat you, can't hurt you, can't, it's like Vietnam. We had the technology. They had the jungles. They won. Somalia would continue also to be a headache for America. And even to this day, we have naval forces out in that area to keep an eye on the pirates and stuff. It takes a long time for Somalia to start developing a government and order. But I wanted you to look at these two things. On the classroom, where I want you to go right now, there are 2 links, and I'd like you to look at both of those links. It'll help you understand Desert Storm. All right, have a good weekend.